folk, it seems as if, especially, in Saudi Arabia, they want a part of the celebrity and of the entertainment. But it's not as if suddenly boyfriends and girlfriends are going to be moving in together, because now we're seeing this engagement between Cristiano Ronaldo and his now fiance. Instead, as Kareem put it to us, this is actually beyond sports washing. This is essentially Saudi saying, listen, we have got a ton of money and we're going to throw it at all of these various, sporting events. And you will need us. There is no other way around it, but we will continue to be and engage in the way in which Saudi Arabia has engaged kind of on the global stage before. And so instead, it's not sports washing. It's Saudi saying, we've got money. You need us out there to push forward with sports around the world globally. And so you're going to accept us.
Yasmin Vasugian, super interesting. Thank you very much for that
days
reporting.
Rolled on from that Instagram post, the conversation did not fade. It only deepened because every new public appearance by Cristiano Ronaldo and Georgina Rodriguez in Riyadh became another chapter in a story that people could not stop reading, whether they were supporters, critics, or just curious onlookers. And in a country where personal relationships had for so long been kept in the private sphere, seeing one of the most famous couples on the planet so openly connected to the city felt like something that could either be a historic pivot or a temporary illusion. The glitter of the diamond had done its job. It had caught the world's attention. But now the real fascination came from the context around it. The meetings. Ronaldo was rumored to be having with league officials the quiet talks between his management and local cultural advisors. The carefully staged public outings, where Georgina's style walked the razor's edge between global fashion and local, modesty and each choice. Each photo, each unspoken detail became part of the larger mystery. There were whispers in private circles that Ronaldo's contract included clauses giving him more personal freedom than any other foreign athlete in the e-car. Country a recognition that his global image was inseparable from his personal life, and that to suppress it would be to diminish the value he brought. But no official would ever confirm such terms. So instead, people were left to speculate. Reading. Between the lines of media coverage and even the silences in interviews, and the silence itself was telling, because while fans and journalists abroad were eager to ask about the engagement, Saudi reporters steered clear, focusing instead on his athletic performance, as if the less they said, the safer it would be, but the audience was too connected to online to ignore it. TikTok edits of the ring hit millions of views. Instagram reels blended clips of Georgina walking through Riyadh malls. With romantic music, Twitter threads dissected what her outfit choices might mean in the cultural context, and international outlets kept framing the engagement as a sign of change, whether or not it really was. Meanwhile, within the kingdom, the reaction was far from uniform. Young Saudis, especially women, often saw Georgina as an aspirational figure. Her confidence, her visibility, her glamorous lifestyle resonated with a generation that had grown up watching the rest of the world through their phone screens, while older conservatives viewed her as a test of limits, concerned that the line between respecting traditions and losing them altogether was being dangerously blurred and caught between those perspectives. Was Ronaldo himself never visibly defensive, never openly defiant, instead projecting calm discipline, focused the same traits that had carried him to the top of football. And in that restraint there was a kind of power, because by saying nothing definitive, he allowed both sides to project their own interpretations onto him. He became a mirror, reflecting back whatever people wanted to see. Reformists could point to him as proof the country was changing. Traditionalists could reassure themselves that this was an isolated case, a one-off for a man of his stature and global status, and the government could quietly enjoy the international press without officially endorsing any broader policy shift. And yet beneath the surface, there was a growing awareness that moments like this could not be entirely contained, that the world had seen Riyadh not just as the site of a major sports league, but as the backdrop for a public engagement of one of the most famous couples alive. And that image would stay online forever, impossible to erase. And perhaps that was the most lasting part of the whole affair. Not the diamond, not the ring, not even the exact circumstances of how it came to be allowed, but the fact that it happened in the open. In the age of social media, where cultural moments cross borders faster than governments can react, the engagement of Cristiano Ronaldo and Riyadh had become more than a romantic milestone. It was a stress test for how far the kingdom's new image could stretch without snapping a live experiment, in balancing tradition with global integration. And in the months ahead, every move by Ronaldo and Georgina would be viewed through that lens. Whether they intended it or not, their dinners, their travels, their family moments, all part of an ongoing narrative that was bigger than them. And as Part 5 closes, it is clear that what started with a glittering ring and a surprising location tag has turned into a conversation about power culture image and the invisible negotiations between a nation's past and its ambitions for the future. And perhaps the most intriguing part is that the ending has not yet been written, leaving everyone from Riyadh to Madrid to Los Angeles waiting to see whether this was just a beautiful exception or the beginning of a new normal that will quietly redefine what is possible in the heart of Saudi Arabia. And as the weeks passed, the engagement was no longer just a trending topic. It had embedded itself into conversations at dinner tables in Riyadh, in whispered discussions among students in Jeddah, in long analytical threads from Saudi bloggers and cultural commentators, and for many, the fascination came not only from the fact that Cristiano Ronaldo had chosen to share his happiness so publicly, but from the quiet acknowledgement that this was a moment that could not have happened a decade ago. Because 10 years earlier, the idea of a global superstar openly celebrating an engagement with someone outside of marriage would have been unthinkable in the public eye here. Yet in 2025, the reality was different. Not entirely open, not entirely. Rigid, a middle ground shaped by calculated decisions and unspoken allowances, and it made people wonder who exactly had made the call. Was it Ronaldo and his team confident enough in his influence to take the risk, or was it the Saudi authorities themselves deciding that this was a strategic move, a soft power gesture that could signal to the world that the country was modernizing without making any official legal changes? The speculation only deepened when certain images from the engagement appeared in international publications that are rarely granted access to Saudi-based personal stories. The lighting, the poses, the way the jewelry was displayed, all suggested a level of media management that felt too precise to be accidental, and for some, this was proof that the engagement was part of a larger narrative being shaped for global consumption. A story that intertwined romance, celebrity, and geopolitics in a way that was almost cinematic. Meanwhile, traditional voices in the kingdom voiced their discomfort not always in loud protests, but in subtle warnings about cultural erosion, about the danger of bending values for the sake of image. And the more these voices spoke up, the more the other side countered that the world was changing and Saudi Arabia had to adapt to remain competitive in attracting talent, tourism, and investment. Ronaldo's fans outside the kingdom mostly saw the engagement through a different lens for them. It was a heartwarming milestone for their idol, proof that he was happy and still living a full life beyond the football pitch. But even among those fans, there were debates about whether he was being used as a symbol, whether he had knowingly stepped into a role that was bigger than football, and whether his brand could handle the political weight that came with being in Saudi Arabia. For Ronaldo himself, or at least for the public image of him, the approach remained consistent. No interviews explaining the engagement, no political statements, no overt challenges, just a carefully curated series of posts showing training sessions, family moments, and brand deals, as if to remind the world that he was still first and foremost a footballer. Yet in doing so, he allowed the engagement to linger as an unresolved mystery, an open question that could be interpreted in countless ways, and that ambiguity was powerful because it gave every side of the conversation room to see what they wanted to see. Reformists could claim it was progress, conservatives could insist it was an exception. Outsiders could marvel at the cultural complexity, and insiders could debate where the real boundaries now lay, and somewhere in that space between perception and reality, between love and strategy, between tradition and change, the engagement lived on as a symbol that refused to settle into a single meaning. Every new match Ronaldo played, every public appearance he made, was now colored by the fact that he was not just a player in Saudi Arabia, but a participant in a much larger experiment, one that might not even have a clear ending. And as Part 3 closes, the stage is set for the next chapter, in which the public fascination will only intensify as whispers of behind-the-scenes negotiations and possible shifts in official stances begin to leak into the media, turning a personal celebration into one of the most closely watched cultural case studies of the decade. It was hardly a surprise that the engagement announcement of Cristiano Ronaldo, the global soccer superstar, was accompanied by a photograph of a diamond the size of a jumbo olive. But what drew even more attention than the jewel itself was the location tagged in the Instagram post published by his partner of 9 years, the model and influencer Georgina Rodriguez, because instead of Paris, Bora Bora, or Dubai, the image came from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, And for many, that single geotag was louder than any caption could have been the capital of the conservative Islamic kingdom. Is not the kind of place that has traditionally been associated with glamorous public displays of romance. And a decade ago, such an announcement would have been nearly impossible here, back when the religious police patrolled the streets warning couples, keeping an eye on modesty laws, and reminding women to cover their hair back, when the idea of publicly declaring love outside marriage could invite real punishment, when sex outside of marriage was still punishable by flogging. The contrast between that past and this polished public moment was staggering, and it became the heartbeat of the debate. People began asking whether this was a sign that the kingdom was changing at its core, or simply an exception carved out for one of the most valuable sporting assets in the world. To those watching from abroad, it seemed like progress, a breaking down of old barriers. But inside Saudi Arabia, reactions were layered. Some saw it as a sign of soft reform, proof that the country could host global icons without erasing their identities, while others saw it as a dangerous precedent, an erosion of long-held values dressed up as modernity. And the more they looked at that sparkling diamond and the smiling faces beside it, the more they questioned who had approved such openness. Was it the royal court giving a quiet nod? Was it the league executives keen to keep Ronaldo content and committed? Or was it simply a case of no one daring to interfere with the personal life of someone who had already brought billions in attention to the kingdom? But what lingered in the background was the reality that most ordinary couples in Riyadh would not have been able to do the same without consequence, and that unevenness was what kept the engagement in constant conversation in cafes and WhatsApp groups and in media columns, where the safer way to discuss the issue was to talk about the celebrity aspect without touching the legal or moral implications, yet even in coded language. The tension was clear. The engagement was no longer just a love story. It was a symbol of the crossroads where Saudi Arabia now stood, and whether intended or not, Cristiano and Georgina had become the faces of that moment. The diamond glinting not just with romance, but with questions about privilege, reform, and the boundaries of tradition. And as the days turned to weeks, the image from Riyadh stayed in circulation, still being reposted, still being dissected, still sparking whispers that behind the glamour there was a negotiation happening in real time between the past, the present, and a very uncertain future. And as the cameras kept flashing and the world kept posting, there was still a lingering question no one dared to say out loud. Because in a place like Saudi Arabia, where traditions and rules carry centuries of weight, the idea of a public engagement, especially involving someone as globally recognized as Cristiano Ronaldo, was never just a romantic headline. It was a statement, a challenge, and perhaps even a quiet test of boundaries. Some whispered that it was about love and nothing more, while others suspected that the timing, the optics, and the way the announcement was handled were calculated to send a message both to local fans and to an international audience. The sight of Cristiano with his partner sharing moments that in many other countries would be ordinary was in this setting a cultural ripple with layers that only those inside could fully read. There were murmurs about how much influence he actually wielded in shifting perceptions, whether intentionally or simply by living his life, and every smile, every gesture, every piece of jewelry shown in the engagement photos became a clue for people trying to decode the deeper meaning. And in the weeks that followed, the conversation only grew louder. Not just in sports circles, but in cultural debates, in coffee shops, in private family discussions, and in endless threads online. Because to some, it felt like a turning point, while to others, it felt like a crossing of a line that had been drawn long before Ronaldo ever set foot in Riyadh, and through it all, he stayed calm, focused on his training and his matches, seemingly unbothered by the waves his personal life had created, yet perhaps aware that in this moment in history, his choices carried a significance that went far beyond football and into the heart of what Saudi Arabia might look like in the years ahead. When Cristiano Ronaldo first stepped onto Saudi soil, wearing that iconic number 7 shirt, it was already clear that his arrival was more than just a football transfer. It was a cultural event, an economic headline, and a diplomatic talking point, all rolled into one. And for months, the focus stayed mostly on his performances. The stadium lights, the roar of the fans, the carefully curated social media posts. But beneath the excitement, there was always an undercurrent of curiosity about how a man whose life had been lived in the open across Europe's most glamorous capitals would adapt to a country where privacy, formality, and tradition play such a dominant role. And then came the engagement news, not through whispers, not through hidden hints, but in a way that was public enough to capture the imagination of the world. And that was when the questions began to spread faster than any match highlight. People wondered how it was allowed, whether there were exceptions, whether the rules had shifted for him, or whether this was a one-off moment granted to a global superstar. Because in Saudi Arabia, public displays of romantic partnership, especially outside marriage, have long been a sensitive subject tied to religious customs and cultural expectations. And here was Ronaldo smiling alongside his partner, sharing a piece of their private life with millions. It was not the first time an international figure had tested those boundaries. But the scale was unprecedented because Ronaldo was not just famous. He was beloved by fans young and old, by people who saw him as a symbol of excellence and resilience, and his choices had the power to inspire and to provoke. At the same time, some observers pointed out that his presence in the kingdom had already been used to signal a shift towards openness, hosting major sports events, bringing in tourism campaigns, and now perhaps showing that certain aspects of personal life could be expressed more freely than before. But others were skeptical, wary of reading too much into it. They argued that Ronaldo's case was unique, a combination of his fame, his contract, his value to the league, and his diplomatic usefulness, making it impossible to draw wider conclusions. Still, the engagement news became a lens through which people discussed broader issues, from the evolving role of women to the influence of global culture on local norms, from the balance between religious authority and entertainment to the fine line between respecting traditions and embracing change. And what made the story so compelling was that it was unfolding in real time with no clear outcome in sight. Every photo, every media headline, every comment from influencers or former players added another layer to the puzzle. And the more people talked, the more the narrative expanded into areas far beyond football. Some fans framed it as a love story, a man who had found happiness and was unafraid to share it. Others saw it as a calculated step, perhaps even advised by PR strategists, to maintain Ronaldo's relevance in global headlines, especially as his playing career entered its later chapters. And there were those who viewed it through the lens of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 reforms, seeing the engagement as part of a broader campaign to rebrand the kingdom for a global audience. The government's investment in sports entertainment and tourism had already drawn both praise and criticism, and Ronaldo's engagement fit neatly into that conversation for supporters. It was proof that Saudi Arabia could host international icons without forcing them to hide who they are for critics. It was evidence of selective flexibility, a bending of the rules for those who bring economic or political value. The reality was likely more complex, shaped by negotiations behind closed doors, unspoken understandings, and the delicate balance between modern image and traditional roots. And meanwhile, Ronaldo himself remained silent on the deeper implications, never directly addressing the cultural debate, instead focusing on his matches, training sessions, and brand endorsements. His silence allowed the speculation to grow, because in a world where celebrities often rush to clarify or defend themselves, his choice not to feed the conversation made it even more intriguing. Was he being careful to avoid controversy? Was he simply uninterested in the noise, or was he aware that the mystery only kept the public's attention longer? The Saudi press handled the engagement cautiously, covering it in a respectful, celebratory tone without digging into the cultural complexities, while international outlets leaned into the contrast between Ronaldo's personal openness and the country's reputation for conservatism. Social media, however, had no such restraint. Saudi Twitter buzzed with both praise and disapproval. Instagram comment sections filled with emojis ranging from hearts and fire to questioning faces and prayer hands, and TikTok was flooded with clips, debates, and mashups of Ronaldo's engagement images with traditional music or global pop hits. Each side of the debate seemed to be looking at the same photos but seeing entirely different stories. And as the days passed, the engagement stopped being just a piece of celebrity news and became a mirror reflecting how the kingdom was changing or resisting change depending on who you asked. It raised questions about where the lines were drawn, who had the privilege to cross them, and what it meant for ordinary people watching from the sidelines. For Ronaldo, it might have been as simple as love for the Saudi leadership. It might have been a calculated risk for fans. It was a moment to cheer for critics. It was a point of contention. And for cultural analysts, it was a case study in how personal moments can become political symbols without anyone officially declaring them as such. And so part 2 of this unfolding story was not about whether Ronaldo had scored goals or lifted trophies, but about how a single engagement announcement had rippled through layers of society, media, politics, and culture, leaving everyone wondering what would happen next and whether this was the start of something bigger or just an extraordinary exception that would fade as quickly as it came.
This video covers legal allegations in a news context. All claims are from official filings and no guilt is implied until proven in court, please. Keep all discussions respectful. Allegations are not facts until proven in court.